Welcome to Encounters at the Bridge. This episode is brought to you by the word ingredient, because good output depends on well-chosen inputs, and it occurs 873 times in the Hungry and Frozen blog. My name is Brian O'Carroll, and with me today is Laura Vincent. Hello, welcome to Encounters at the Bridge. We're here with Laura Vincent, who is the world-famous blogger of Hungry and Frozen. Laura, tell us how you began your blog.
It was 2007.
Yeah.
I was flatting.
Yeah.
Do you call it flatting in England?
I'm guessing flatting means living in a flat. Is that right?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
a guess. Just a guess.
I wasn't sure if that was like a quirky New Zealand word.
No, that's a fantastic New Zealand
Okay.
expression. Use as many of those as possible. We love them.
Okay, I'm not going to stop and ask you, like, do you have this in England?
You could do that
every
too.
time I
That's all right.
say an anecdote. But all right, I was living in this hideous flat, it was damp, like the walls were made of Weet-Bix, basically. Like you open the window and spiders just strode in unhindered. It was horrific. And it was also very much the norm for student flats in those days. And also nowadays, not much has changed. Anyway, so my partner at the time was working night shifts and I was spending a lot of time on my own. And I found this food blog of this woman in Australia who had put it upon herself to cook every recipe in Nigella Lawson's debut cookbook, How to Eat. And at that time, that was like at the start of just this huge obsession that I had with Nigella Lawson.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd loved her for ages, but that year I managed to get her cookbook. And I was just like, my God, this is a thing that a person can do. Like I've always loved to cook. I've always loved to write so much. And 2007, like it wasn't that long ago, but it was a long time ago in terms of the internet and the things that we sort of knew about the internet and just our general ease with the internet. Yeah. So I didn't know that food blogs were a thing. I didn't know that I could just put myself on the internet and chat about food and that was allowed. Like I didn't have to, get a license or something. And I was like, my God, I could do this. I love cooking so much, but I really love writing about cooking as well. And so these two things just came together. And 13 or so years later, it's still around. I'm still doing it. Yeah. And I think it's the most committed I've been to literally anything in my life.
Do you know how many blog entries you've done?
Oh, at least 1,000, I think. Yeah. I did a lot in that first year because I was a student, but I was almost blogging like every single night. And the quality is absolutely appalling. But I've left them up there, like, because I'm not ashamed of, my grotty photography or like but I don't necessarily recommend that people go back and read them.
Oh, I have done. So I did some of the easy kind of research, the statistical research on your blog, and one of the things I realised was that you've been blogging for 700 weeks and 4 days.
Oh my Lord, my 700th week of blogging.
Yeah,
that's an achievement of some sort.
Fantastic. I love a round number.
Yeah.
Your love of Nigella Lawson, where did that lead you?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I would say she's had an enormous effect on me, an enormous influence on me.
Yeah.
I first discovered her, it was 2001.
Yeah.
Pre 9/11. I don't know why I said that. This has nothing to do with 9/11. But
do you know we're going to be saying? We're going to be saying pre 9/11 or post pandemic. Which is it? Okay.
Oh God, yeah. The great eras of our time.
All in one lifetime.
But it was 2001, and I saw it. Her show must have been on television because I just happened to see it, and I don't know if you ever have those moments of clarity where you're like, my life is forever going to be altered because of this moment. And for most people, it's like when they lock eyes with the person they're going to marry or when they, discover some kind of scientific breakthrough. But for me, it was when I saw Nigella Lawson on TV.
Right.
Up to that point, all of the well-known, television chefs or whatever, they had a sort of hearty practicality to them, but not necessarily like her warmth and her enthusiasm and her generosity and her sheer love of food.
Right.
And it really sparked something in me, and I've just been a changed woman ever since.
How much of your time do you spend doing cooking with the Nigella Lawson enthusiasm and passion fired in you?
I mean, it sort of depends throughout my life, you know, whether I've been like, I was with my partner for many years.
Yeah.
And then I was sort of like the sole cook, selfishly. Like I would literally like
selfishly, yeah.
I would refuse to let anyone else cook. And then, you know, when I've been on my own, obviously I'm cooking for myself, but then it sort of depends as well on what's happening in my life. When I was working as a bartender, that certainly affected my ability to cook, because I would be working throughout most of the times we'd normally be eating a square meal.
Right.
And at the moment I'm living with my parents. And so I'm cooking often, but I'm also, it's a different kind of cooking, because it's like I'm cooking for a whole family, and sometimes they want to cook and sometimes they want to have things that are not what I want, or, you know, stuff like that. Or it's just a little bit more, there's different things to take into account. But I'm cooking all the time. If I'm not cooking, I'm thinking about it or planning it or daydreaming about it, you know.
Yeah.
I find a way to work it into my life.
One of the great things I found on your blog, which was, it's very easy to find because it's at the top, is you did a Fraser tie-in.
I did, yes. My Frasier food blog, What the World Needs Now. I've always loved the TV show Frasier. I started watching it like very intensively, or rewatching it, about sort of 4 or 5 years ago, when I was going through just like a bit of a bleak period. Yeah. And I found it incredibly comforting, in much the same way that I find Nigella Lawson sort of comforting.
Okay.
And just the rhythms of it, the humor of it, the cleverness of it, the acting, the actors, everything about it. It's just so rich. And as is often the case, this silly idea popped into my head. I just kept hearing the words, Frasier food blog, Frasier food blog. I can't always trust my instincts, to be honest. So I didn't act on it right away, but it really stuck with me. And I was just like, you know, they talk about food so much in Frasier, and it's been such a comfort to me, this TV show, and such like a constant point of reference.
Yeah.
And I could just picture what I would do. And I was just like, God, what if I just do it? Like, who cares? I didn't buy a domain name or anything. It's very, very low key. So it's just a .blogspot.com, I think. But each episode of season 1, I would sort of write a sort of review / analysis of it, and then I would make a recipe inspired by something from that episode, whether it was something inspired by a particular word or phrase, or something inspired by an actual scene in a restaurant in that episode. And it was so much fun, and it was a different kind of writing to what I normally did with my food blog. And I've really loved writing and analyzing each episode, and just being very self-indulgent, because it's not like anyone was editing it. Do you know what I mean? Like, so I was just like going to town on my theories and my interpretations. There's, I think, 22 episodes or 21 episodes in the first season. As I got towards the end of the first season, I was just like, oh God, I don't want this to end, but I don't know what I should do next. Whether I should end it at season 1, or if I should just do the whole bloody series, which is like 11 seasons, or what I should do. And so instead of deciding what to do, I've just done nothing, which is why it's sat there hovering on the penultimate episode.
It's like a perfect monument, though.
It is.
So I did another piece of easy research I got to do, which I'm very grateful to you for, was I decided I would watch one episode. I watched the one called Author, which
that's fun.
You remember that one? Yeah.
Yeah, it's when they beat each other up, isn't it?
They do, yeah.
Yeah.
There is actually food in it. You've replicated, I think, the
was it muffins? Yeah.
There were muffins in it. Orange muffins?
Something like that. Yeah.
And inspiringly, you suggested adding the nuts from the hotel as a topping. I thought that was a lovely flourish.
It's all in the text.
What people may not know is that you've already published a book.
That is correct.
But that's in your past now, because you're now looking forward to doing a second book.
That is also correct.
How did your first book go? What did you get out of that?
Right. So my first book was a cookbook published by Penguin.
Yeah.
And they approached me. So
wow.
This is the dream, right? You've got cookbook, what obviously I would have wanted to write. You've got Penguin, a legacy, established, everyone's heard of them, publishing house, and they approached me. That's very rare.
Was a book on your mind at all, or was it just like
it
you
was?
Never thought of it? Okay.
I was thinking about it all the time. I'd
really
like
hard.
to imagine that I just powerfully manifested it. You know what I mean? Just like the absolute power of my thinking about it made it happen. But it was astonishing when I got that email. I didn't know anything about the publishing world back then. I was very naive. I am marginally less naive now. But so I got this email saying, like, hello, I'm from Penguin. I love your blog. Have you considered writing a cookbook? We'd be interested.
Yeah.
I felt like I was in a movie, but it turned out that actually there was a lot more practical ground to cover after that, because it wasn't just a case of like, okay, now here's a book deal. It was a case of, okay, now I need to write a proposal. We basically need to convince everyone higher up than this publishing person.
Right.
I sort of likened it to playing a video game. You've got to go through this level, then this level, and then you've got to defeat the final boss at this final board meeting.
Yeah.
So it turned out there was actually about 2 months of just work to put in, and I didn't tell anyone other than my partner at the time. I didn't tell anyone else because I was just like, I don't know where this is going to go. I don't want to make it into a big deal and then it turns into nothing.
Yeah.
I just have to keep it a secret, which was really not terribly good for my circadian rhythms or mental health or anything. I was just kind of a wreck. But the day came and the final boss was defeated. They accepted the book proposal and it was all happening. And then I had two options. Let me see. So this was 2012 when I found out. They said I could either have it published in 2013 or 2014. And I said, obviously 2013, time is short, I'm impatient, let's do it tomorrow. They said, okay, in which case you need to write it and photograph it and submit it in 3 months' time. And I was just like, okay, is that a lot? Is that a little? I don't know. That seems fine. It turns out that's not very long to write an entire book and also test the recipes and photograph them. But we did it. It became my life. I quit my job, which I was super fortunate to be able to do. Yeah. Because I got a little bit of an advance, which immediately disappeared. And also I, had a dual income because I was with my partner at the time. It just became our life and it was this wonderful montage. I was very fortunate. I had two best friends who were excellent photographers, another friend who had just like a wonderful eye for aesthetics. So they became my team. Yeah. And I would just write all day, cook all day. We would take photographs of like 12 dishes at once. It was just all go. And it was the most fun. It was the most wonderful time. And I didn't really want it to end. Yeah, it was just magical. So I managed to get it all done in 3 months because, I don't know, is that hard? I don't know. It was surprisingly straightforward. The writing part was easy. The testing was a little bit stressful. Yeah. Because there's a lot of responsibility when you're putting stuff in a book. A year later, it was published. It was very surreal, to be honest. It's very surreal to see your name on a book, So here's what happened next. So I got everything that I wanted. I got all my dreams. And it turns out, again, I guess this is still a bit like a movie. It turns out that getting your dreams isn't always actually what you wanted, or it doesn't quite work out how you think it would. A bit like, I don't know, have you seen the musical Wicked? There's this at the start of scene 2 that Glinda, the Good Witch, she does this elaborate song about getting your dreams isn't always what you think it'll be. And it was pretty much, that was me. I was also like, I have to act happy about this because this is my dream. Yeah. And what happened was I had a sort of an interesting time just with the publicity and the promotion of it. Yeah. I don't want to speak out of turn about Penguin because they published my book, which was really wonderful of them. Yeah. I didn't necessarily feel that they 100% knew what to do with me.
Did they involve you personally with like book signings or something like that?
There wasn't a whole lot.
No.
I thought there would be more. And I just thought there would be a bit more sort of hands-on support, and that I would be involved in like giving them ideas and, you know.
Okay.
But it was sort of like, okay, here's your 5 things. Okay, you've done them. All right, that's that.
Oh.
And I was just like, oh, I thought there'd be, meetings and champagne and, just another montage. I thought there'd be more montages, but that's okay. It's all a learning curve. And then somewhat unexpectedly, they just sort of dropped me completely. And again, like I said, I don't want to speak out of turn about Penguin because the publishing world is terribly small. But this did literally happen, so I think it's okay to say it. So they just sort of dropped me quite unexpectedly. But I know that the book sold well, and I ended up selling basically every copy.
Yeah. Is that sort of the natural life cycle, do you think, of authors? Is they get a book, goes out, that's it?
It probably is. It's probably pretty common. The major success stories are a lot more rare. They're just the more noisy stories, There's probably zillions of people like me.
Okay. How much of the final publication did you have to provide them? I mean, were they doing the layout and...
They did the layout and design. I provided them with text.
Yeah.
So recipes, intros, acknowledgements. And
your photos that your friend took?
Provided them with the photos, yeah. And then, they did the sort of look of it.
Yeah. Are you still using those people for your blog, the photographers you have, or different people?
No, but I am still using them. I'm still using them for friendship, though. We're still very, very dear friends.
Yeah. Who photographs the food on your blog now?
That's me.
That's you. You're doing very well.
Yeah. Thank you. I've gotten a lot better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see that you've worked hard at it over the 700 weeks.
I have worked at it. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not invisible. We're doing something very clever today because I'm recording this on Thursday and you're recording it on Friday.
That's correct.
Is because you're 13 hours ahead of me. You're on the other side of the world.
I am in the future.
You're in the future and in New Zealand summertime, so you're an extra hour ahead. But
so weird. I don't understand the world.
So New Zealand's this fantastic foreign exotic place I've never been to, and even Peter Jackson's version of it didn't quite bring it to life for me in the way that I imagine it really is. But you mentioned spiders earlier, and I became aware once because there was a New Zealander in England and he saw some spiders and it was scary for him. He didn't like it at all. I couldn't work this out for a couple of seconds, and then I realized, oh no, hang on, you're in England now. These spiders are harmless.
Oh.
What are spiders like in New Zealand? I mean, if you see a spider in New Zealand, how far do you have to back up?
Well, okay, so we're not at Australian levels where the entire country, like the flora and fauna, are all actively trying to kill you.
Oh, yeah.
But the thing with New Zealand spiders is that, first of all, there are a lot of them, and they're very, very bold and casual.
Oh.
But for the most part, they're fine. But there is one that's really deadly. So it's kind of like a bit of spider roulette, because you'll see a spider and you're like, oh God, is it the terrible one? Or is it just like the regular one? So yeah. But do you not have any deadly spiders over there?
I don't think so. But there's been recent talk of something called a false black widow, which can be painful, but I don't think it's deadly.
That must be very peaceful.
I guess it is, yeah. I guess. I mean, I feel quite fortunate. We don't have a lot of animals over here that are really, really bad for you. No, we don't regularly see sharks. We don't normally see poisonous snakes, and spiders are just normal. So no, it's quite peaceful in that sense, yeah.
Oh, that sounds marvelous.
Book number 2.
Yes.
How are you approaching that? What are you going to do to make that work for you? Dream number 2.
Dream number 2. So I'm like, okay, it's been nearly 10 years. I think I'm ready to dream again. I've just finally built myself back up from the last publishing experience. So this is an entirely different dream. The book that I'm hoping to publish is not a cookbook, but a novel.
Yeah.
Which it might seem a little left field if you've only read my food blog, but perhaps not, because my food blog is very... florid. There's a lot of writing in there.
Yeah, you've normally got 2 sections to your food blog, and only one section is the recipe and about the food. The rest is
just
would you
me
call it?
prattling. Yeah.
Just you. Oh,
Just
okay.
prattling on. And I've always, ever since I was, I don't know, since I learned how to hold a pencil, I've always been writing little stories and fiction and fanciful little tales. And
Yeah.
even when I was a kid, I would try to write these novels and I'd end up losing steam because I wouldn't do any planning. I would just start and, spend lots of time lavishly describing what dress the main character was wearing and what color her hair was. And then I'd just be like, oh God, what happens next? Oh, well, I'll make up a new character. I'll start a new novel. So this is something that I've been doing forever. I just haven't been talking about it or doing it very publicly. But I wanted to write a novel. I had this sort of story within me.
Yeah.
And it's a bit scary with writing a novel. It's a bit easier writing a food blog because, you just post your recipe and you go and, you need to have some skill and some authority, but that's that. But to call yourself a writer, like a novelist, it's like, God, I think that one feels like you really do need to get permission from someone. That's a whole other level.
Do you talk to any other authors, any other people who are writing novels?
I have people that I am acquainted with or that I'm friends with that are writers.
Yeah, okay. Do they feel the same way about that?
I know that some of them do. I think there's a lot of anxiety and general insecurity in the writing world.
I think it's the same for quite a lot of different creative worlds.
I think it is, yeah. In anything where you have to put yourself out there is just, it's a bit terrifying.
I've known a number of performers who, when they're out on stage, you think they were, completely full of self-confidence and everything. And then when they're off stage, they're not. That's an act they put on for you to entertain you. And it's, the real person is full of the same insecurities that everyone else is. Exactly the same. They're just normal.
Yeah,
people.
Absolutely. And it's very hard to sort of know, you think something could seem so good in your head. And it's the same as if you're a singer or a performer, you could be like, God, I can hear myself singing this. I know that I can sing it so well. But what if this is actually terrible? And then I get out there and everyone, points and says, no, not only are you terrible at this, you're also a bad person. And this reflects on you morally and,
Imposter syndrome. Have you ever heard that?
Yeah, I think that's what I was digging at, actually. Yeah, imposter syndrome.
Yeah. I have something I picked up from your blog, and I wondered if this is a feature of your recipe life. A cookbook from Aunt Daisy?
Oh, sure. So Aunt Daisy is not my relative. She's like a figure in New Zealand food culture history. She's a bit like, who would you have over there? Like a Mrs. Beaton.
Okay, yeah.
I want to say it was the 30s and 40s. I would need to double check that, but she was a radio host in New Zealand, and she would sort of do recipes over the radio. But this was back when radio was one of the main forms of mass communication and entertainment, and she just released numerous cookbooks with dozens and dozens and dozens of recipes with very little explanation or information in them. They sort of assumed a level of confidence, I guess, of the average housewife of the time. But they're so much fun to read. They're so fun to read. They're such an interesting piece of history. And I really love her stuff.
And she's a New Zealand person. Does it relate, the food in it, does it relate specifically to New Zealand in some way?
It does and it doesn't. I think because of the time when she was around, there's a very, very English influence. There's a lot of things like cakes that you would have with afternoon tea and, scones and like 50 zillion different types of preserves. And it's very, very housewifey sort of stuff. And there's also like, it sort of reflects a lot of things about society. There's lots of things like, mock raspberry jam or mock cream pie or things reflecting like whether it's wartime shortages or just general economic corner cutting or whatever. I find them to be like a really interesting sort of social history, but also they're just so much fun to read because it's a sort of a type of cooking that we don't necessarily do anymore, that I don't know that I'd want to do anymore, to be honest. But it's really fun to read about. Yeah.
It sounds like you'd go exploring in cooking. Is there stuff you've got planned to go and look at cooking wise?
At the moment, well, when I say at the moment, I'm pretty sure it's for life. I'm now vegan.
Yeah.
So I've been vegan for a couple of years now. And that's been really, really fun and really interesting. And obviously it's a big restriction in many ways, like cuts out a whole lot of foodstuffs. that a lot of my sort of cooking personality was very much based around butter and dairy, and butter was a huge focal point of my cooking. And it was quite scary to step away from that and to sort of step away from that comfort zone and that sort of safe point. And also, I mean, let's face it, like butter is delicious and it's a very easy way to make something delicious. And so without that fallback, I was just like, God, who am I? What do I cook anymore? But it's been so fun. I mean, a lot of the stuff was already there, so it's not like it's brand new, but I'm just discovering so many more ways of cooking because I'm looking for different things, actively seeking it out.
Yeah. What drives you to be vegan? What's actually pushing you in that direction? Because you said it's quite hard, but you're doing it.
Yeah, it can be a challenge. I'm doing it and I'm loving it, and it doesn't occur to me to not do it. So that's positive. A thing that has been a constant in my life is that every now and then I will just drastically change everything for no good reason, without warning, with very little forethought.
Jumping without looking.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's how I became vegan. It had been slightly on my mind for a while. It's a little bit, again, like I'll hear this idea in my head. I'll be like, what if you go vegan? And I'll be like, is that a good idea or one of my stupid ideas? Oh God, I don't know. But it sort of stuck around. And basically, my main reason is just a general fear about the environment and what is happening with climate change and so on. There's a lot of things about my life that I can't change, like my consumption of various plastics and so on. I can try and reduce that. But I was like, being vegan is actually something that I can do to make myself feel less panicky about the environment, because it's like I'm doing something concrete. And second of all, it is kind of a drop in the bucket, but I'm like, if I'm one person that's doing it, and then someone else is also one person that's doing it, and then there's another person that's just one person doing it. Yeah. There's a few of us all doing, trying to slightly ease the load on the environment. And so I just did it overnight. I didn't ease into it. I didn't go vegetarian. I just sort of snapped cold turkey. I've had a couple of wobbles where I'd sort of eat a bar of white chocolate, but for at least the last year or so, I haven't had a wobble at all. Yeah. And it's been remarkably easy and straightforward. I was lucky at the time. I was living in Wellington, which is the capital city of New Zealand. It's a small city, but it's very, a very foodie kind of place. And so there's heaps of vegan options. The bar that I was working at the time, literally half the staff were vegan. So that was it was like an easy environment to be around. It wasn't like everyone was like, oh, have a steak. Everyone was just like, oh, yeah, cool. Here's my vegan cookie. Have some. So there's heaps of places. Now that I'm living with my parents in a rural village in the middle of nowhere, it's a little bit more challenging. Look, I picked a really good time for it. Like, I really appreciate the vegans who were doing it in like 1992. Yeah. Okay. When it was mostly just like lentils.
I'm not sure. I mean, the motivations of someone in 1992 might have been slightly different. They may not have had quite as clear a picture of climate change, for example.
No, possibly not. Not as much as we have now, I don't think. But I think it was still. Climate change was still sort of on the menu back then. But there is also like the animal side of it as well. I was just also feeling like maybe a little bit disconnected from my food, a little bit disaffected. Yeah. I looked at, a steak, which I loved steak. I loved it, very rare and as in undercooked, not very occasionally. But I was just like, where does this come from? What am I even looking at here? Could I look a cow in the eye and tear a strip off it, you know what I mean, like in good conscience? And I just I felt like there was this weird distance growing between me and my food. And like, obviously, I love animals. The idea of killing them isn't delightful, but it wasn't necessarily the animal aspect that was my main motivation. But it's become something that has sort of solidified it for me, because the longer that I go on not eating meat, not eating dairy, the more I cannot fathom it. I just sort of I look at like a steak, and whereas before I'd be like, woohoo, steak. Yeah. And now I'm just like, oh man, that's a dead cow. That's a bit of a bummer. Like, that cow was alive. And it was probably bred specifically for this purpose. So that was its life, And the longer I go on, the more it's just like, the animal side has become more important to me.
Okay. You sound like you're a very reflective person. Like, you're always looking at yourself and analysing your own behaviour and the way you do. At
I'm
least
like a
talking to
weird
yourself.
mix of I'm like a weird mix of heedless and reckless and super self-analytical. It's kind of
Yeah.
like very all or nothing.
Yeah.
I find it hard to hit a happy medium where I'm just like making chill decisions and then acting on them in a relaxed manner.
Yeah.
It's
And
just like,
so
yeah,
right now you're knitting as well, aren't you?
that's correct.
That's
Yeah.
good. Is that a how does that affect you? Is that a calming thing? Or is that
It's so calming. It's
Yeah.
very calming. So I started to knit about 10 years ago, on and off and on and off, and I never really committed to it. I made a friend a very wobbly blanket for a newborn baby, which she very generously and graciously received.
Well, that's a big thought, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
That counts a lot.
Yeah, it was thoughtful, and
Yeah.
she could see that. But it was about 2 years ago that I just started knitting again, and it stuck.
Yeah.
And then, coincidentally, then the pandemic happened, and it turned out, and then New Zealand went into a level 4 lockdown. I think you call it tier 4 over here, but level 4 is the strictest lockdown where you basically stay at home 24/7 unless you are a hospital worker or something.
Yeah.
And so the knitting that I'd been previously just enjoying, it became a really huge part of my life, because obviously during lockdown there's not much going on in one's life, and I do find it incredibly calming. There's something about just the repetitive, using my hands.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm sure it's like, there's fairly obvious reasons why people find it calming. You're focusing on something, you're creating something. It's, it's active, but you're not, you're sort of, you can sit down and be relaxed, but you're still active. You're not just sort of staring at the TV. And interestingly, so as well as finding it incredibly calming, I also find it really helpful creatively. I find that I do really good thinking when I'm knitting.
Okay.
It must be something to do with like the kinetic blah, 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 the way my brain works. But yeah. And then also, as well as that, so I don't know if I've mentioned, but so I have ADHD.
Yeah.
And I find it very hard to just sit still.
Yeah.
And when I say sit still, I mean like I find it hard to sit still and just watch TV or sit still and read a book. So if I'm knitting, then I can do anything. If I'm knitting, I could be in the longest, most boring meeting. I could do any, you know what I mean? I could watch a 6-hour film.
So it absorbs that frenetic bit.
Yeah, it does.
And then do something else with your mind.
That's correct.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Everyone should knit.
It's just been absolutely wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. I did some other digging on your blog just for fun.
Oh yes.
And there are some fantastic things that came up. So your relationship with Nigella is confirmed by the numbers here. So I just searched for some words on your blog, like you can do with Google. You can say, just search this site for this word. And I did something like, so I searched for music. Music came up 858 times.
Wow.
But you mention music a lot. You go, this is the music I've been listening to while
that's correct
recently, and that's really amazing. So occasionally I do pick a blog from you and listen to the music you suggested there, the stuff you've been listening to, because it's a great way of finding out new stuff.
I love writing about that music, and it's nice to know that at least someone is getting something out of it.
Yeah, I mean, why, if you write about cooking, why not write about other stuff too? So your relationship with Nigella, I thought I'll find out how many times you mentioned Nigella.
Okay.
In 700 weeks, 926 times.
Wow.
But here's the spooky thing, okay? I then put in food 926 times.
Really?
Spooky.
Nigella is food. Food is Nigella.
Food. Yeah.
Wow.
And then just for fun, I put in vegan because I thought I knew. Yeah. Then that's 925 times. That's only one less.
Really? God, I really bang on about it, don't I?
Bang on about vegan, and that's more recent, because you've been banging on about Nigella since day one, I think.
I have. Yeah. Good God. I love that. I'm open about my unabashed love for her. Don't hide it at all.
No, you don't. No. You mentioned Rent 518 times.
Now, to be clear,
yeah,
okay. So there is rent, the concept, as in paying rent to a landlord, which probably I would say, no, but I would say probably in more recent years, that is what ends up getting mentioned more because it's just a constant bugbear of mine. But definitely that comes from the Broadway musical Rent, which is also where the name Hungry and Frozen comes from.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
is that actually a line in the show? Is that
it is? It's in it's in one of the opening songs. It's in the title song, Rent, actually. Yeah.
There's a lot of words in that. I love that musical too. We did a production of it over here once, and I was involved.
Oh, look, fantastic. it's so much fun. Like I know it's flawed and it's earnest, but I mean, it's a Broadway show. You know, they all are, and it just it meant so much to me, and it still does. Like my relationship to the show has changed as I've gotten a little older, but I'm no less of an earnest person than I ever have been, and I still love it. You know, it's still, every time I sort of hear it or see it, even though I've got a bit more life experience now, it still gets me, you know? Yeah. So I even though like whenever I'm like, oh, my name comes from the Broadway musical Rent, I sort of get a little bit self-deprecating about it, but I don't actually really care. It's just like, that is who I am.
Have you had other things where you've just like changed your life at right angles and it's been, looking back on it, you think, oh, why? That was amazing. Why did I just do that? Just for no reason. Just jump in with 2 feet.
Well, where I am right now, living with my parents in the middle of nowhere, that was definitely one of those things. So I was bartending, working around the clock. Really loved being a bartender. I was good at it. You know, I'm not good at many things, but I'm very good at being a bartender. But the pay was appalling. And it wasn't going to get any better no matter where I worked. Unfortunately, that's just a bartender thing in New Zealand. My rent, as in not the musical, but the money I paid my landlord, just it was constantly climbing. It was out of control. And it was a bit miserable, really. I was constantly exhausted. Bartending is very, very tiring. It felt like I was working around the clock, but my bank balance was going backwards. And I was feeling very burnt out mentally. Like I didn't have much energy to put into my blog. And I knew that I could tell, you know, I was like, God, I sound so tired on my blog. And I had all these, and this sort of comes back to the novel. I had all these ideas within me and these things that I wanted to write. And I was like, I'm just never going to have the time. I'm never going to catch up on my sleep. I'm never going to have enough money to do anything. I'm never going to be able to save. I'm just constantly going to be working and paying rent and working and paying rent and trying to sleep in the middle of that. And I went home for Christmas for like literally 2 nights in 2018. And my mum sort of jokingly said, you know, like, why don't you come back here and just call it a writer's residence? And now, like, I haven't lived at home since ever, basically. Since I was a child, a legal child. I think it's a particularly Western culture thing where there's this whole sort of stigma about living with your parents and being a grown adult and all these things that other cultures are very lucky to not be burdened with. You know, they sort of celebrate being around your parents. But this idea sort of stuck with me. You know, I mean, I had my best friends in the world were in Wellington. I had a whole life there. I'd been there for 13 years. I was like, God, I can't just leave all of this and all of these people and go live in the middle of nowhere with my parents to be a writer. Like, first of all, that seems incredibly audacious to say that I'm a writer, and also to leave all of this. And like, how dare, I think a bit of it was almost like, how dare I think that there could be better things for me? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's almost like, no, this is as good as it's going to get, just being a bartender and paying rent. But again, that idea was in my head. And then I just quite drastically was like, okay, no, it's happening. it's going to happen, everyone. And so within, it wasn't necessarily like as rapid fire as that, but I sort of, you know, shut down my life there. Left my apartment. I was the friend who was the photographer and the stylist on my cookbook. They let me move into their spare room. So I was there for about a month, just so that I could finish my lease on my apartment and move out of there and put my stuff somewhere and also put myself somewhere.
Yeah.
And then my parents drove down to Wellington and came and got me. I can't drive, by the way. My life would be very different if I could. All of a sudden, after being a nighttime bartender person who works all night and sleeps all day and, has tons of friends, all of a sudden I was living with, 2 retired 60-something-year-olds in the middle of nowhere. And it hasn't necessarily been the easiest. But as a result of that, I've written so much.
Yeah.
I've written a whole novel. I've started a second novel. I've written a poetry collection. I've started a collection of short stories. And that's a lot of writing.
Yeah.
That would not have happened if I hadn't changed everything and moved here. And again, like, I was so lucky. Not everyone can do that. And it's not something that I necessarily say, like, I'm not saying this is what you should do if you want to be a writer.
Yeah.
I'm just saying this is what I did, because a lot of things had to fall into place. It's a privilege. It's a big privilege. Not long after I did that, the pandemic happened. So that was really weird, because all of a sudden everyone was at home.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is okay. Not a lot is changing for me. Being in lockdown is basically like my normal life at the moment.
Yeah.
But something about the pandemic, I think a lot of people found this, is that it just sort of, it fries your brain a little bit.
Okay. Yeah.
Just the anxiety and the sort of weird, numbing sameness of every day being the same. All these things, the stress, the fear. So it wasn't, even though not a lot changed for me materially during the lockdown, aside from really not being able to leave the house.
Yeah.
It still was, it was a lot harder to write. I felt like, yeah.
Okay. This reminds me of something someone else said. It's sounds like a similar kind of thing. There was an actress who I know who was telling the story of how she was working as a waitress, as you do if you're an actress, because you can't always be acting. Sometimes you have to be doing something else to pay their rent. And she said, in a moment of reflection of her own, she'd be there waitressing, and a friend came to her and said, "Hey, do you want to be in a play?" And she found herself thinking, no, I've got a job to do. And then she's thinking, no, wait, hang on. Am I an actress or a waitress?
Yeah.
And so that sounds very similar to me. It's that kind of thing where some work, like being an actress, but even more being an author, it's like there's no one defining it for you.
No, you don't have a manager, or you don't go to the office, you don't clock in. It's all self-directed.
Yeah. And it's like you've got to take other things out of your life in order for it to happen, which is what you do exactly. And that's very strong self-reflection. That's very sort of directed, sort of, this is what I'm going to be. That's good.
Yeah. That's good. Like I said, I did write a whole novel. So, I mean, thank goodness it wasn't for nothing. But I mean, like, I value having this time with my parents. I hadn't really spent much time with them for years. I definitely, like, once the pandemic happened, I know I was really lucky to be staying with my parents and not worrying about, like, having a job in Wellington or, working in the hospitality industry.
Oh, yeah.
Or having to worry about rent. I mean, it just is what it is. But yeah, I was like, I am going to decide that I am a writer, not someone who wants to write or thinks about writing, but I'm actually going to do the thing. Yeah. Well,
you are right. You've got 700 weeks worth of writing under your belt already.
I bloody do.
Fantastic. Yeah. Right. Thank you very much for coming on the blog.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to talk to you.
It's been lovely to talk to you too. It's been very enlightening hearing your perspective on everything you do. And I hope people will pop out and see your blog, which is called
hungryandfrozen.com.
hungryandfrozen.com. It's fantastic. You can dip into there every day and get a nugget of wisdom, pretty sure.
That's right.
Even if you don't cook.
That's right. There's also my, like, very sus musical recommendations and songs that I've been listening to, and all sorts. There's something for everyone.
This narrative perspective on your own life, which, as someone who doesn't really cook, and certainly don't follow recipes, that's too hard. I find that too hard. I still read your blog, which is, there you go. Everyone can do it.
That is a fantastic compliment. That's what I want. I want it to be something that people can just read, whether or not they want to cook. Yeah.
Right. We're looking forward to this novel.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you for having me.
For quitting your job so that you can fully devote your life to your inner calling, I thank you. This podcast, made from scratch with fresh ingredients, is a product of Brian O'Carroll Design. That's me. You can send your comments and feedback to me and to my guests at brianocarroll.co.uk. Today we encountered the novelist and creator of Hungry and Frozen, probably the best food blog in the world, Laura Vincent.